When I launched this channel a couple of years ago, I learned about Digital Combat Simulator, or DCS for short, mostly through the comments on my Secrets of the F-14 episodes, which were basically procedurals for how to fly the Tomcat as both a pilot and a RIO. In addition to those comments, many of those in the DCS community reached out to me and said those episodes were helpful as they were trying to get better at flying the F-14. At about the same time, I connected with RG at BVR Productions, now Authentic Media, and he asked me if I was interested in getting involved in DCS. And through his efforts and the support of Eagle Dynamics and Thrustmaster, I built my first DCS rig, which I documented in my Mooch's DCS rig episode. And since then, I've done a number of Mooch's hacks and real F-14 pilot flies DCS episodes as well. After that, the folks at Next Level Racing sent me their Boeing Military Edition SimPit, which has been an important part of my rig since then. If you haven't seen the episode where I unbox, build, and review this piece of gear, check it out. Now, as I explained through all of those episodes, I was using TrackIR for visuals. TrackIR is a great system, easy to set up and configure, but the whole time I was using it, there was a steady chorus of DCS flyers telling me I needed to switch to VR. A couple of things kept me from making the move at first. I was told by several subject matter experts that TrackIR was preferred over VR for content creation because head movement generally made VR content hard to watch. Second, I had the opportunity to fly DCS using a friend's VR rig, and quite frankly, I wasn't impressed, basically because the resolution of his setup wasn't great compared to TrackIR. The way I describe it is like flying through an impressionist painting. But the chorus of those telling me to try VR continued, most notably from my patrons, who I've learned to trust over the months of discussions we've had during our weekly Zoom happy hours. So I made the move, but like a lot of things in life, it wasn't as easy as those urging me to switch made it seem like it would be. Few things are as hard on the old back as more than 2,800 hours sitting in ejection seats and a lifetime of swinging a golf club. You know what else is hard on your back? A fat wallet full of other people's business cards, expired membership cards, and metro passes from cities you don't live in. A while back, I discovered the Ridge. The wallet redefined. High speed, low drag, as we say in the fighter business. So I'm psyched that the Ridge is sponsoring this episode. The Ridge holds up to 12 cards, plus it has a money clip for your men's group winnings or whatever cash you need to carry, and it comes in over 30 colors and styles. Mine is burnt titanium. Ridge is having a big sale right now for their 10th anniversary, and you can get the best deal by using my special link, ridge.com/mooch, and save up to 40% on your order through March 26th. Again, that's ridge.com/mooch. Check the link in the episode description below. The first thing I did was buy a headset, and after asking around, I settled on this HP Reverb G2, which goes for around $450, which kind of puts it in the middle of the price range for VR headsets. I plugged the goggles into my original computer, which was built for me by RG at Authentic Media, and the results were a lot like what I experienced using my friend's VR rig, which was low resolution and a lot of clipping. Now at this point, let me admit that I'm more of a learn by burning than do the research up front kind of guy, and the things I'm sharing here are very much a function of that. So when you plug the VR headset, which uses 2 USB ports by the way, into your computer, something called Windows Mixed Reality pops up, and along with that is an interface called Steam. Right away, the intel I got was 2 things. One is, don't use the DCS version within the Steam ecosystem. Use DCS Open Beta as usual. Second is, don't use Steam. Use a thing called OpenXR. At the time, there was a great thread in the DCS site's discussion channel about how to get OpenXR to work, and it involved downloading, then dragging into the DCS program files, and at the end of that process, I was able to switch between Steam and OpenXR at will. Now, all of that isn't required because they made OpenXR quote-unquote native to DCS. For me to attempt to explain it beyond that would be more than my poli-sci major brain could handle, so I'll just drop the DCS site discussion thread in the episode description, and you can read it for yourself. Now let's talk about the 2 most important variables in VR, and that's resolution and frame rate. Better resolution makes things like trees and ships and other airplanes more defined, and a higher frame rate makes motion smoother and prevents what we call clipping, where the motion is not at all smooth. In fact, it'll give you a headache. As soon as I opened DCS using OpenXR, I saw a huge improvement in frame rate, but not resolution. So I asked for some settings advice from the DCS VR veterans on my Discord server, my patrons, and also I watched a bunch of DCS VR episodes on YouTube. And that's how I heard about OpenXR Toolkit, which is another downloadable app that allows you to tweak your settings while in DCS. Using the toolkit, I was able to improve resolution, but I will say the UX of OpenXR Toolkit is not awesome in terms of keystrokes required to work the gains. And that introduces something inherent to VR, which is working with the goggles on while you're flying, and then looking beneath the goggles to manipulate the keyboard. Now, I've gotten pretty good at keeping the goggles on and finding escape, F1 and F2, spacebar, but for anything more complicated than that, like, for instance, finding 5 on the number pad, I generally have to sneak a peek. So that's something you get used to. I should also mention that when you buy the Reverb G2, you get 2 of these hand control gizmos, which are kind of fun in VR. But in practice, when I've been flying VR and DCS, I haven't used these. I've just wound up using the mouse. There are other settings you'll need to adjust to maximize your VR performance, starting with mixed reality and NVIDIA and Windows games, and also within DCS. Again, I recommend putting something like DCS VR settings in the YouTube search and finding an episode that has more than a couple of dozen views and trying those settings out. A lot of this is trial and error. But after doing all of that, my VR experience was still not great, and the quality of the visuals was nowhere near what I was getting with TrackIR. So it was time for some more drastic measures, and that meant investing in some new hardware. As I mentioned, my friend RG at Authentic Media built my first computer from components he had around his shop, and it worked great for flying DCS using TrackIR. Of course, I knew about things like memory and storage, but before I started down the DCS road, I knew next to nothing about the moving parts of a high-powered gaming computer. Things like motherboards and CPUs and power supplies and graphics cards. In fact, I was amazed at how big these suckers are, not to mention how much they cost. So my first rig had this card in it, which we couldn't get to work, so we upgraded to this RTX 2070. Conventional wisdom was a 2070 card wasn't enough to power VR and DCS. I needed a 380 or better. I decided to bite the bullet and get a completely new rig instead of trying to build something piecemeal. So I got the Corsair Vengeance i7400 gaming PC. Here are the specs. Lots of storage, lots of memory, and most importantly, a GeForce RTX 4090 graphics card. Corsair builds these computers on demand, and it took about 6 weeks to show up, but the wait was totally worth it. With all of this gear, the DCS VR experience is totally immersive, not just beamed on a monitor in front of you, but all around you, which makes you feel to the greatest virtual degree possible that you're really in the cockpit. I've been exclusively flying the F-14B, and using VR, things like flying formation and tanking and landing on the carrier are a lot easier because that immersion gives you a greater sense of relative motion, especially closure rates. And for the record, sitting in the Rio cockpit gives me serious deja vu. In addition to native OpenXR, the latest improvement to the DCS VR experience is called multithreading. Again, I am not a network engineer or a coder, but basically multithreading spreads the VR demand signal across your CPU more efficiently. And as a result, you get higher frame rates. In fact, in my case, the frame rates I've seen are 30 to 40 frames per second higher, which is very noticeable. But like everything else I've talked about in this episode, there are some steps you need to follow to make multi-threading work. As I said before, when you're looking for settings advice, stick multi-threading into YouTube search and follow the steps outlined in the most viewed episode of the options that come up. Now, I haven't dismantled my TrackIR setup, but I don't see myself going back to using TrackIR even for content creation. VR is, in fact, as awesome as everyone told me it was. And what you also learn when you switch to VR is the hunt for higher frame rates and resolution never ends. So I look forward to continuing to work the gains to make the presentation even more realistic in the future. That hunt is part of the fun. But in the meantime, if you're either a DCS TrackIR flyer or somebody who's been thinking about starting DCS from scratch, I hope this episode has given you some information to help start the process. Speaking from my own experience, the effort in terms of time and money has been well worth it. All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, click the button and ring the bell so you don't miss anything going forward. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider using the super thanks, the heart icon below, or become a patron at patreon.com/WardCarroll. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.